All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We need to establish a fundamental truth right out of the gate. High-impact leadership, it's not some mystical art form reserved for a chosen few. No, it's actually a repeatable architectural system. Too often, we treat leadership like this vague, glowing aura, but today, we're going to look at it as a structural blueprint. We're going to examine the exact frameworks, decision architectures, and operational metrics that separate decent managers from truly transformational leaders.
And there's this brilliant quote from the legendary Peter Drucker that really anchors the intellectual weight of what we're about to build today. He said, "Management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things." Think about that for a second. You can be incredibly efficient at executing the totally wrong strategy, and all you'll achieve is just failing faster. True leadership is about defining that strategic direction and creating the environment where the right things happen consistently.
So to get there, we absolutely have to debunk this stubborn myth that leadership readiness is just, well, a vague personality score. We've got to contrast that outdated idea against the reality of a rigorous operating review. Real leadership isn't about slapping on some generic competency labels or spouting motivational fluff, right? It's about execution quality. It's asking the really hard questions. Where's our control weak? Where does execution need serious attention? If your leadership assessment relies on how charismatic someone is rather than how effectively they map out and clear operational bottlenecks, you are definitely measuring the wrong things.
So here's our literal architectural floor plan for this explainer. We're going to cover the system, the foundation, the framework, the infrastructure, and finally, scale.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, System, specifically the Leadership Operating Review.
Now here is a highly tangible checklist to evaluate your organization's actual readiness. Ask yourself, can your leaders make crystal clear decisions? Do your teams execute without confusion? And hey, is there a culture that actually supports honest feedback, or do problems kind of just get filtered out before they ever reach the top? Notice that last point too. Managers removing friction before performance drops. The best leaders don't just yell at their teams to work harder. They act as system architects. They're actively hunting down and removing operational bottlenecks from the workflow.
Moving right along to Section 2, Foundation. This is all about alignment and ownership.
The absolute anchor of this foundation is the one-seat rule. It's the concept of the directly responsible individual, or DRI. This framework dictates a simple but brutal truth. Every single initiative must have exactly one owner. Because listen, when two people are responsible for something, nobody is. If something goes wrong and the finger just moves sideways across your org chart, your foundation is cracked. Shared ownership is zero ownership. When one seat has one owner, blame has absolutely nowhere to hide. And true accountability actually begins.
So I want you to ask yourself a really sharp question right now. When something goes wrong on your team, whose seat is it? Does everybody know instantly? Figuring this out helps you see if your organization suffers from the hero complex, where a leader swoops in to personally save the day and solve every crisis, or if it actually has clear, single-threaded ownership that empowers the team to solve things independently.
Next up, Section 3, Framework. Let's look at the accountability ladder.
This 8-step accountability ladder is brilliant because it directly challenges you to self-audit where your team really sits. Notice that definitive line running right through the middle. Below the line, it's all deflection. Things like, I didn't know it was mine, or I assume it'll just fix itself. But look above that line. That is where extreme ownership lives. Step 5 is I call it straight. No sugarcoating, no managing optics, just the truth. Step 7 is arriving with the actual solve, not just whining about the problem. And Step 8 is driving the outcome before anyone even has to ask. As a leader, your core job is to build a culture that actively pulls people up this ladder.
All right, Section 4 is infrastructure. We're getting into strategic decision-making. Have you ever sat across from someone who just seems to think differently? It's not magic, it's a method. These 6 mental models show how the absolute best leaders process what's right in front of them to unblock organizational friction. They don't just analyze the data they're handed, they look for what's missing. They identify repeating patterns instead of just playing whack-a-mole with isolated incidents. And crucially, they think in second-order outcomes. They're constantly asking, okay, where does this lead next and what happens after that? They also master decision velocity, knowing exactly when to move fast and when to decide before absolute certainty makes it completely obvious. Now let's look at John Maxwell's incredibly powerful framework. It shows how true influence builds upwards, step by step.
Notice how it steps up from a mere title, that's positional leadership where people only follow you because they literally have to relational and then productive. But the real paradigm shift, that happens at level 4, people development. At this stage, your success is no longer measured by your own personal growth, but by the growth of others. The true measure of a leader here is how many other leaders you create. And finally, you reach pinnacle leadership, where you are building a lasting legacy.
Finally, Section 5, Scale. This is all about smart capacity building.
Listen, smart delegation is about creating capability, not losing control. Look at that very first point. Define the outcome, not just the task. People perform exponentially better when they actually understand the ultimate goal, rather than just getting a list of vague directives. You also have to give them decision space. Instead of saying, hey, do it exactly this way, try asking, how would you approach this? We have to stop micromanaging activities and start delegating outcomes. This is the ultimate leverage mechanic that frees you up to do the deep strategic work.
Another totally crucial facet of scale is your communication range. A leader who communicates the exact same way in every single room is eventually going to lose every single room. The most influential leaders possess an incredibly wide communication range, allowing them to match exactly what the moment asks for. If a room needs a fast decision, that requires a directive style. If a team has lost their belief, they need a motivational or visionary style. A broken relationship, that needs a relational approach. If you master the range, you master the room.
And speaking of mastering the room, these 7 rules of high-stakes presentations prove that confidence really just comes from structural preparation. I mean, look at the 20-word strategy rule. If you can't state your ask in 20 words or less, you are not ready, period. And I absolutely love the pre-read rule. Sending materials in advance sends a clear signal to the room that you respect their time. Early in a career, it's so easy to just rely on your experience and wing it, but that leaves, as the source bluntly puts it, dead bodies in your wake because your intent and your impact are completely misaligned. These rules align them perfectly.
Which brings us to this. This is literally the ultimate accountability question that every leader eventually has to confront. The unconscious pressure to validate your own capability to remain the absolute strongest contributor across all functions, it's deeply rooted in human psychology, but it heavily restricts collective performance. You've got to shift from personal validation to collective excellence. Real scale begins the exact moment you stop needing to be the smartest person in the room and instead start building a room where the best ideas can win. We're going to wrap up this explainer with a profound shift in language. Bad leaders talk about themselves. Average leaders talk about the work. Great leaders talk about their people. Notice how none of these phrases start with I need or I decided. They shift from I to you or we. When someone on your team hears, what do you think? They stop waiting for instructions and they start taking ownership. So as you go forward to build your own leadership architecture, ask yourself, are you just creating followers? Or are you creating confident, capable people who can actually lead themselves? If someone recorded your team meetings tomorrow, what words would they actually hear you use?